Hi, and welcome to Caterpillar Cross Stitch. My name is Ford, and this week I'm going to teach you a way to save yourself some money on framing by mounting your cross stitch to a foam core board yourself and using an off-the-shelf frame. If you've learned anything from any of my videos, do me a favor right now and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment down below. It costs you literally nothing than a few seconds of clicky clicks, and it makes a big difference for me. So if you do that, I'd really appreciate it. With that out of the way, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. Now the supplies that we're going to be using today are, of course, our finished project, some foam core board, some pins, and I have a couple of different options for how we're going to do that. A nice precise ruler. I prefer one that has metric measurements. The frame that we're ultimately going to put our project in. Optionally, a light table or tracing pad. And some acid-free or archival tape. I've got framer's tape here because I'm extra, and I used to work in a frame shop and it spoiled me. The first thing we're going to want to do is wash and press our finished piece. So make sure you check out my tutorial on that here, because I'm going to assume that you've already done that. So this is the project that I'm going to be framing, and this is the frame that I want to fit it in. I found this at a local thrift store. The fabric for this project I actually dyed using the ice dye technique that I taught you a few months ago. So make sure you go and check out this video for instructions on how to get beautiful custom dyed fabric like this yourself. So the first thing we need to do is figure out how big of a piece of foam core we're going to need in order to fit it into our frame. So while I know that this is nominally a 5x7 frame, I know that there can be some variation from manufacturer to manufacturer on how big that actually is. So I'm going to want to take some measurements here. And even though I am American, I do like to use the metric system for projects like this because it gives me greater precision and makes the math a little bit easier. So this comes out to 180 millimeters by 130 millimeters. So those are nice and round, so that's going to make that a little bit easier. But I do need to have a little bit of room for the fabric to pass between my piece of foam core and the edges of the frame. So I'm going to shave, let's call it 4 millimeters off of each of those dimensions to leave enough room for the fabric between them. So I'll just go ahead and make myself a note here that what I want ultimately is 126 millimeters and 176 millimeters. So my next step is going to be to take this piece of foam core board. Now, part of the reason that foam core is a great option for something like this is that it is widely available. You can literally buy it in the supermarket in a lot of places in the last minute child school project department, as I call it, which is the art and office supplies department, and it's relatively inexpensive. It's going to be difficult to fit this on my work table here with all my cameras and stuff, but we'll figure it out. I'm going to go ahead and measure out my dimensions here, and then measure out the other dimensions. Okay, there we go. I've drawn out my lines here for the piece of foam core that I want to cut. And another reason that foam core is great to use for this is it's quite easy to cut with something you may already have around. You can use a kitchen knife if that's all you have. I like to make sure that I have a nice sharp edge so that I don't crush the edges, so I get a good crisp edge on my piece, but whatever you have available will work. I've got a cute little work knife here that I like to use for all of these kinds of things, which is great because I can easily replace the razor blade. So let's get that cut out. Careful not to cut the surface of your table. Okay, it's always a good idea to double check your fit before you move on to the next phase and commit to anything. So I'm just going to make sure that my piece of foam core fits in my frame with just a little bit of extra wiggle room there so that the fabric will also fit, because it's got to squeeze in between these sides here. And it looks like we're going to be good on that front. So moving on to the next step, getting the piece actually mounted onto this foam board. Now, because the foam is opaque, it can make it a little bit difficult to figure out where I want to put the foam on my project. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can handle this. If you have the glass for the frame that you're going to be using, you can actually position the glass over your project because you know it's the same size as the frame. Get it positioned just right, then line up the mat with, or then line up the foam with that, and then you'll have a perfect alignment. I don't have the glass for this frame anymore. So you can do this with one of two methods. One would be to do some measurements. Measure your foam core, measure your project, figure out the difference, add half of that difference to each size. But I like to do it another way because perfectly centered is not always balanced. Because like with this project, for instance, it's quite bottom heavy. So I might choose to position it a little bit differently rather than perfectly centered. Or I might want this to kind of line up more with the bottom instead of the top. So you have visual balance and then you have, perfect centered. And I'm going to go usually for more of a visually balanced look. So that's why I like to do it in situ. I like to do it practically. So the way I do that is I use my little light table. You've probably seen me talk about this a few times on the channel before. And what I'll do is I will put my mat board on my light table, and then I will align my project using that as a center. So rather than measuring and centering perfectly, I will just use a visual centering. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hold those two things against each other. I'm going to slide that off the edge of my table so I can get a hold of it. And then I'm going to turn that over. So that I can access the back of it. So now that we've got that positioned the way we want to, we're going to get the pins that we're going to use for this and put those somewhere accessible. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to fold over one of the long sides of the project. If it's square, it doesn't really matter which one, but if it has a long side, start with the long side. And then we're going to take one of these little pins. I got some little pins that are called sequin pins or applique pins. I just like how small they are and how unobtrusive they are. So I'm going to pull this tight against the back of my piece, and I'm going to drive just one pin in right in the middle and push that up against the foam. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Just pull my fabric down tight against it and drive one pin in approximately in the middle. Now that that's done, I want to do the same thing on the two sides. And I'm just trying to keep the tension on the fabric throughout as I do this. Okay, now that I've got all four sides pinned, I'm going to double check my placement. I'm just going to turn my project over and take a look that it still feels centered to me. And that still looks good. So I'm going to continue from here. Now, if you want to, at this point, you can get a couple of little pieces of your tape. Now, a word of caution on the tape, make sure that you're getting a tape that is acid-free and that is archival. That's part of why I like to use the framer's tape, is because I don't have to worry about it chemically altering my project over time. So I'm going to use just a little piece there to kind of hold those flaps in place while I work to free up my hands. And then I'll do the same thing over here. These pieces are not permanent, so I'm not going to stick them down super hard. They're just to kind of give me a little bit of freedom of movement. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin the rest of the way around. Now I'm using those little applique pins or sequin pins that I bought for this. But I did also find something really cool which I think could be really handy. These are called tidy pins. Oh, you can't see anything there. These are called tidy pins. They're used for like pinning bed skirts or curtains in place. And they have a flat head on them, but they're a little bit long. So if you're going to use them, they will hold your piece more securely, which is great. But if you're going to use them, you want to be very careful to make sure you go in parallel with the surface of the fabric so that you don't accidentally punch out through the mat board. But I'm just going to continue on with my sequin pins because they're just so small and unobtrusive. And as you work your way out so that you can make sure that you have even tension throughout, you'll want to mirror yourself. So I'll put a pin here. While holding the fabric tight. And then on the other side, I'll put a pin in the corresponding spot. And then I'm going to do it over here. So I'm going like center, one from center that way, one from center that way. Again, this just helps keep the tension even as you apply it across there so that you don't get a bumpy or wavy finish. You want a nice flat on the face of it. So each time, pull the fabric tight a little bit and put your pin in there. I'm spacing these pins somewhere around 1/2 inch apart, or like a little over 1 centimeter apart. You could probably space them a little bit farther apart than that. I just kind of like how the uniformity looks there. And now that the middle section of the long side is pretty well secured, I'm going to put a couple of pins along the short side, just so again, to keep things even, keep things tight. While I'm doing that, you should go check out the Caterpillar Cross Stitch social media accounts. The Facebook and the Instagram have an amazing following of tens of thousands of helpful and creative and supportive stitchers, and it's just a really great place to be online, and it's super fun to be able to do stitch alongs with a large group of people like that. So make sure you go check both of those out. Okay, now that I'm getting close to my corners, I'm going to want to do something with all of this excess fabric. And that's very easy. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch these pieces right up against each other and hold them there. And then I'm going to lay this part flat. Or should I? No, that's how I'm going to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab those two pieces and I'm going to pull them both tight. And at the point where they meet on the surface of my mat board, I'm going to pinch those. And then I'm going to push right here, and that will force this little flap to sort of form a cup. Then I can just put a piece of my framer's tape on there. And that will hold that. I'll probably put that on a little bit prettier later on, but I just want to get it out of the way for now. So then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Pull that tight against both sides. Pinch that all the way down against the fabric, and just push here starting from the corner. And then I will just continue my way around doing the same thing with the rest of the corners. Okay, and that will hold my corners out of the way while I do the rest of my pins. Also a good idea to sign up for the Stitch Club email newsletter. You'll get advance notice of any upcoming projects, stitch-alongs, retreats, and that kind of stuff that Caterpillar might be coming out with. Plus, as soon as you sign up, you'll get an ebook with like 10 free PDF cross-stitch patterns in it, including a cool year-long tracker pattern that you can use to track temperature or mood or habits or whatever. So hit the link down there in the description so you can get all that great stuff. Okay, so now that I've got all my pinning done, I'm going to neaten up my corners a little bit here. But I just want to show you But I just want to show you what that looks like along the edges there. Got all these pretty little pins here holding it in place. There we go. Tape's a little bit tidier now. I like that better. Part of the reason I'm doing it this way is because I don't want to trim this project down. The frame that I have for it is not quite the perfect frame, and I'm hoping to find something better a little later, but it might wind up being a different size, and if I've trimmed this down, then I'm just stuck with it. So using the taping method here instead of just cutting my piece down to the size of my mat board gives me some freedom later on to reframe it in a different way. Or, you know, my heirs. I mean, not descendants. I won't have any of those. I made sure of that. And then I'm just going to slip that into my frame and give it another once over. That looks very, very nice. I'm super happy with that. Now, the frame here is a little bit shallow for what I've put in here. So normally I would use my framer's gun and drive some flexi points in there to hold it in place, but there's not quite enough room for that. You can get some little bracket things that will attach to the frame that will give it a little bit of extra depth. You can find those at your local craft store. But you can also just use your good quality tape to hold that in there. So there we go. We've got a preservation archival mount for this so that we've preserved the entire piece and we can reframe it in a different way later if we want to. Preservation archival mount at a frame shop is going to cost you hundreds of dollars, and we just did it for like a quarter's worth of foam core, maybe 50 cents worth of pins, and honestly the tape was probably the most expensive part. That tape's like 20 bucks a roll. So, and of course a 50-cent frame from the thrift store. You can still see the price tag on it even. Now next week I'm going to show you a similar way to mount it, but to display it without the frame in a really decorative way that uses a lot of the same techniques. So make sure you come back for that. Other than that, I do want to thank you so much for watching. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, my name is Ford, and I will see you next week.